The fire is dying. You can feel the cold pushing in from the dark, pressing against your chest like a hand. Around you, 10,000 men are breathing, some praying, some sharpening iron, some not moving at all. The smell of pine smoke and sweat and something older, something animal, fills every breath you take. Your hands won't stop trembling. Not from cold. Not from cold. Tomorrow, the ground will be red. You already know this. And somewhere across that valley separated from you by nothing but darkness and silence, they are awake too. One of the men beside you opens his mouth, closes it again. Then, from deep inside the camp, a single horn sounds, and everything changes. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely cannot believe this story finds people in cities I've never even been to. The mystery that will drive us through this entire story is not who won. You may already know that. We are in northern Italy. The year is 216 BC. The place has a name, a flat, dusty plain beside a river called the but history will remember it by the nearby town Cani, a word that would echo for 2,000 years. On one side of that valley, Rome. 87,000 soldiers, the largest army Rome had ever put in the field. They had never lost with numbers like this. They believed they couldn't. On the other side, a Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca. 50,000 men. Outnumbered, exhausted, far from home. And yet something in his eyes that night made his officers nervous. The mystery is what happened the night before. What did 87,000 men do in the last hours before the worst single day of slaughter in ancient history? Before dawn, one commander would make a decision so catastrophically wrong that military schools still study it today. A letter written that night would be discovered in a Roman archive to millennia, later one line of it unreadable, as if the writer couldn't finish the thought, and the last man standing in a particular Roman century would be the one no one expected to survive. But first we go back to the fires. His name was Marcus. 22 years old. He was a hastetus, a frontline spearman from a small farm outside Capua, and he had joined the legions because the harvest had failed 2 years running. He had a wife, a daughter, 3 years old, who had his ears. He had told himself he would be home before winter. That night, Marcus did what every Roman soldier was ordered to do. He cleaned his weapons. He checked his sandal straps. He ate his ration of emmer wheat, hard cheese, and sour wine without tasting any of it. The routine was the point. The routine was the armor inside the armor. But here is the smallest mystery we owe him an answer to. Was he in the front line at all? Roman battle formations placed the youngest, least experienced soldiers at the front. The logic was brutal and deliberate. If the front collapsed, the veterans behind could still win. Marcus was positioned to be expendable. He knew it. Every man in his row knew it. And still, they had sharpened their blades. What happened next revealed something about Rome that even Romans found hard to explain. The Roman camp the night before Cani was, by any historical measure, enormous. Nearly 90,000 men required a fortified structure. Ditches, ramparts, watchtowers. 10 gates that functioned more like a temporary city than a campsite. The noise never fully stopped. Animals moved. Sentries called their reports across the dark. Somewhere, a mule kicked a supply cart, and the sound rang like a bell across the plain. Marcus heard it and felt his heart spike before he remembered where he was. The Romans had a ritual for the night before battle that most people don't know about. It was called the sacrificium anteprolium. The sacrifice before battle, and it was not optional. Priests moved through the camp at dusk with sacred chickens, reading omens in the way the birds fed. That night, the chickens ate well. The omens were declared favorable. The consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus received this news and said nothing. His co-consul, Gaius Terentius Varro, smiled. They were not friends. They were not even allies. They had been given joint command of the greatest Roman army ever assembled, and they hated each other. This detail, small and almost petty, would determine the fate of 87,000 men. Here's the thing that should stop you cold. Rome had 2 consuls commanding jointly because of a law designed to prevent military disaster. No single man could make catastrophic decisions alone. 2 votes were required. A check, a balance, the system designed to save them. Guaranteed they would destroy each other, on purpose or by accident. History still isn't sure which is worse. Paulus wanted to wait. The terrain near the river favored Hannibal's cavalry. He said this plainly. He said it at a war council the night before battle, in front of every senior officer. Varro overruled him. Tomorrow, Varro said. We attack tomorrow. Paulus walked out of that tent and into the dark, and stood alone for a long time. One account, possibly from the historian Livy, citing an older source, suggests he sat down on a supply crate and pressed his hands against his face. He was 60 years old. He had served Rome his entire life, and he knew. But stop. Go back. There's something we haven't told you about Hannibal yet. Across that plain, in a very different camp, a very different kind of night was happening. Hannibal's army was a patchwork of cultures. Iberian infantry, Numidian cavalry, Celtic warriors from Gaul, Libyan spearmen, Balearic slingers. They did not share a language. They did not share a god. They barely shared a fire, and yet they were utterly calm. Witnesses describe an army that slept well that night, not because they were unafraid, but because their general had spoken to them. Hannibal moved through his camp personally that evening. He spoke to men in their own language, through interpreters who had been with him for years. He showed them the terrain. He drew it in the dirt. He explained, calmly, exactly what was going to happen. He told them the Romans would press hard in the center. He told them his own center would bend what appeared a break hand, that this was not retreat. This was the trap. He told them to trust the plan when it felt most wrong. This is the detail that historians return to again and again. Hannibal did not inspire through mystery or chaos. He inspired through information. His men slept because they understood. They understood because he had told them the truth. Meanwhile, Marcus and 87,000 Romans were sharpening blades and reading chicken entrails. Within the hour, the omens would prove meaningless. But one man in Hannibal's camp was keeping a secret that none of this could prepare for. His name was He was Hannibal's cavalry commander, a Numidian noble, and the finest horseman in the ancient world. He had ridden beside Hannibal across the Alps. He had watched men and elephants die in the snow. He had never, not once, questioned the plan. That night, Maharbal came to Hannibal's tent and said something that has been recorded, argued over, and mourned for 2,000 years. He said, "Give me the cavalry and 5 days. I will bring you Rome itself." He meant it. He had calculated the route. If Hannibal released the cavalry immediately after the battle while Rome was in shock, while the roads were unguarded, Maharbal believed he could reach the gates of the city before the Senate could respond. He was not wrong. Military historians across centuries have largely agreed. He was not wrong. Hannibal said no. He said no. And the reasons he gave were strategic supply lines, garrison strength, the political complexity of holding a city you've captured without allies inside it. All sound reasons, all defensible. But Maharbal stood there for a long moment before he turned and walked away. And then he said the words that became the most haunting sentence in all of Roman military history. Not shouted, quiet. Almost to himself, but just loud enough. "Hannibal, you know how to win a victory. You do not know how to use one-seed wheat." That a man who had crossed the Alps in winter, who had just orchestrated what would become the single most efficient military encirclement in ancient history, who, in the next 12 hours, would watch 50,000 Romans die in an area smaller than a modern city block. He knew how to win, and in that tent, in that silence after Maharbal left, Hannibal sat with the cost of knowing only that. Back in the Roman camp, Marcus did not sleep. Most of the men didn't. Not really. They lay on their sides and stared at the dark, and thought about the small, specific things that men think about when they believe they might die. Marcus thought about his daughter's Nemelucia. They had called her after the light. He thought about the way she smelled after a bath, that particular warm-bred smell of a small child's hair. He thought about whether his wife would know what had happened to him, or whether she would simply wait. He did not think about Rome. He did not think about the Republic. He thought about Lucia. And in the morning, when Varro gave the order to advance, Marcus picked up his shield. He fell into step with the men around him, men he had marched with for months, whose snoring he knew, whose gods he had learned the names of, and he walked toward the river. The Battle of Cannae lasted approximately 6 hours. In those 6 hours, between 50 and 70,000 Roman soldiers died. That is roughly 8,000 men per hour, 130 per minute, 2 per second. Hannibal's double envelopment was so complete that the Romans at the center could barely raise their swords. They died pressed together. Unable tomoba, unable to fight, the ones at the back crushing forward into the ones who were already dead. Ancient sources describe men who were wounded, but couldn't fall the pressure of bodies, kept them standing after death. Paulus died in the fighting. He had refused to flee. Varro escaped. He lived 4 years after. History does not treat this contrast kindly, but here is the consequence that reaches beyond the battle. Rome did not surrender. They had lost nearly a fifth of their entire adult male citizen population in a single afternoon, and they did not surrender. They raised new legions. They changed their tactics. They spent the next 14 years learning, adapting, building the military machine that would eventually destroy Carthage and rule the Mediterranean for 500 years. Cannae broke them, and the breaking made them something history had never seen before. But there's one more thing, and this is the part that was lost for a very long time. In 1992, archaeologists working near the modern town of Candela Battaglia in southern Italy made a discovery. They found a mass grave, hundreds of skeletal remains, densely packed, some still in anatomical position, some clearly dragged or thrown. The bones showed evidence of blade wounds. Clean, professional, the kind of cuts that tell you these men were soldiers. But the discovery that changed the historical understanding wasn't the bones. It was the objects found with them. Among the dead, a small bronze ring, standard Roman issue, with a single letter scratched into it. The letter was M. Now. Historians will tell you that M was one of the most common Roman initials. Marcus, Manius, Marus, Maximus. The letter proves nothing specific. This is true, but here is what the ring does prove. Someone scratched that initial themselves. Not a craftsman, not a manufacturer. The scratching is uneven, personal, made with something small, a knife tip, a nail. Someone, in the last hours or days before Cannae, marked this ring as their own. Someone wanted to be found. Rome took the news of Cannae in near silence. The Senate met, messengers arrived with the casualty numbers. Senators sat without speaking. Then they passed a law forbidding public mourning for more than 30 days, not because they didn't feel it, but because grief, uncontrolled, would spread like fire. They remembered the sound of the messengers arriving. They remembered the silence in the forum after. They remembered that no allied city had come to help. That for one terrible season, Rome stood completely alone, and they made sure that would never be true again. The military reforms that followed Cannae shaped every army that came after. The manipular system that had failed them became the cohort system. More flexible, more adaptive, harder to encircle. The generals who survived were the ones who had watched Hannibal and learned to think in multiple directions at once. One artifact outlasted all of them. The letter that Paulus allegedly wrote the night before, battle mentioned in ancient sources, but considered lost, was cited by Livy, who suggests Paulus gave it to a junior officer to carry out of the battle if the worst happened. Whether that letter survived, where it might be, whether the lines Livy quotes are accurate, historians have argued about this for 200 years, but the argument itself is the artifact. The fact that people still reach for it, still want to know what a man wrote in the last quiet hours before everything broke, tells you something important about why we study history at all. But there's one more thing. You're back where we started. The dying fire. The pressing dark. 10,000 men breathing around you, and that single horn sounding from deep inside the camp. But now you know what that horn meant. Now you understand what each man carried into that sound. Marcus, with his daughter's name pressed somewhere behind his ribs. Paulus, walking out of a tent, already knowing Mahabal, riding back to his horses through the dark, quiet and certain. Hannibal, sitting alone with a victory he already understood would not be enough. The plain of Canny is farmland now, flat, unremarkable, baked golden in summer. Wildflowers in spring. If you stand there on a still morning, the silence is the loudest thing you've ever heard. And if you look carefully at the soil after rain, even now, even after 2,200 years, still sometimes turns up iron, blades, buckles, the small metal things that men carry when they believe they might not come home.